we are sure that Leclerc will stay in Ferrari until 2029, the year his multi-year contract expires. We see it in today's video. Let's also look at the statements of Gianna Lisi and David Coulthard about Ferrari. We also need to talk about the team's preparation for Canada, and now we see everything in detail. First, please, if you like the videos on the channel, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and activate notifications so you don't miss any videos. And now let's get started. Up until now, Leclerc's future with Ferrari has never been in doubt. Leclerc himself has always valued his team and has always said Ferrari will be the team I will race with forever. I've had a love for the Rossa since I was little. Since I lived in Monaco, went go-karting, I've always dreamed of driving for Ferrari. However, today with this negative season of the Rossa, Leclerc's future in Ferrari has been questioned for the first time. In fact, it is said that the multi-year contract, which will end in 2029, could be brought forward earlier. And so, let's say, use an exit clause to terminate the contract at the end of 2026. And then do a season with the first regulatory cycle. Then do a year of the first regulatory cycle to see what the new Ferrari car is actually like. In case it's not competitive, he might even consider leaving. Leclerc. This is because in 2029, Leclerc will be 31 years old and he doesn't want to end up like other champions, like Gianna Lisi himself, who in the past has raced for Ferrari, but they never managed to make that extra quality leap. So Leclerc is considering another team, both Mercedes and Aston Martin, to see a different future for himself and therefore go to race in a team more competitive than Ferrari. Because to date, with 7 seasons in red under his belt, Leclerc has never managed to achieve much, to make podiums on one side. A younger driver managed to achieve more with a McLaren that was definitely more competitive in the last period of Ferrari, while Leclerc, with a car that was always not up to par, was unable to achieve the desired results. Despite the talent being there, therefore, if, until now, Leclerc's future was marked in red. Well, be aware that there is this exit clause that would allow him to leave Ferrari before the end of the contract, expected in 2029, and leave at the end of 2026. And be aware that not only Leclerc is in doubt, but the same Ferrari management has also questioned Vasseur. With a possible exchange between Antonio Coletta, who currently directs the World Endurance Championship in Ferrari, maybe an exchange with Coletta who could arrive in Formula 1, even though Antonio Coletta himself has always denied his future in the top category. However, Vasseur's future is in doubt from this season, let's say disastrous. Vasseur has repeatedly stated that another chance will be given for 2026. With his technical staff ready to work, however, certainly today, the results of Vasseur are not those hoped for before his arrival. That said, doing some fantasy market, Leclerc could go to Mercedes in place of George Russell, who has not yet renewed with the Brackley team. Even Toto Wolff has always expressed his high regard for Charles, considering him a top-tier driver. Or in place of Alonso at Aston Martin. With the Spaniard's retirement in the next few years, he could go to the Silverstone team and see if he can be competitive. Also powered by Honda. Yeah, I repeat, from the next few years, we could see if Aston Martin can actually fight for the title, even with the arrival of Adrian Newey in the green team. Unfortunately, it pains me to admit it, but this decision by Charles will be very important for his future. Because to date, he is a young driver, but he is not even the youngest in the category. And he has invested a few years in his Formula 1 career without bringing home significant results, as his colleagues have done. The same Max Verstappen, who has won 4 titles. But let's also think about other drivers who have won more than Charles to date, perhaps even having less talent. So it's worth reflecting on his future. And whether to continue with Ferrari or not, we'll see what Leclerc's decision will be. But this early exit clause, well, it scares Ferrari itself, which can't afford to lose a driver as strong as Leclerc, with so much talent. But what is the current situation of Ferrari? In the last 2 races in Monaco and Barcelona, Leclerc has secured 2 significant podiums. Vasseur reiterated that before the updates, which will most likely arrive either at Silverstone or in Austria. As we also said in yesterday's video, we need to squeeze the most out of this Ferrari Scuderia Ferrari 25 and bring home the maximum points on Sunday. This is Vasseur's goal. He has repeated it several times. He does not want to commit to the final result, but he wants to extract the maximum potential. We have certainly seen it. We have seen some kind of improvement in the last races, especially on race day on Sunday. Because in qualifying, Ferrari still struggles a lot, especially compared to its direct competitor, which is currently Mercedes in qualifying. Having said that, we can't expect more than a possible podium here in Canada as well. And we also need to talk about John Alesi's statements, both about Leclerc and Vasseur. About Leclerc, he said he sees him similar to himself, Jean Alesi. In 1995, on June 11, he achieved his first and only victory in Canada, and among other things, he ran out of gas on the return lap where Schumacher gave him a ride. And Alesi had many expectations that season to bring home the World Championship to Maranello, but the car was not competitive and was not up to the World Championship standard. And the fans understood this as well. So Jean Alesi drew this parallel between himself and Leclerc in the sense that Leclerc also has a lot of talent, but he doesn't have the car available to bring home the World Championship. And about Vasseur, he went out on a limb and said that according to Jean Alesi, he is not like Jean Todt. Jean Todt had power in Ferrari. He could command and decide and gave a direction to the team, while Vasseur does not seem to be up to the task. In addition, he added that there are many people inside Ferrari who do not have the skills but want to command. Jean Alesi also stated that Hamilton requires time, but he will return to achieving the results of the past and therefore will become more competitive again. Currently, it's the car that's limiting him. On the other hand, David Coulthard, speaking to the German newspaper Bild, has commented on Hamilton's situation and drew a parallel with what Schumacher experienced. That is, after retiring in red at Ferrari, he returned to Mercedes at the end of 2006. In an attempt to rewrite history, therefore, leaving behind the glorious past built at Ferrari and reconstructing a more romantic story of a German driver in a German team, thus Schumacher and Mercedes did not achieve the hoped-for results. David Coulthard sees the same situation with Hamilton. In fact, he was asked, "Do you think Lewis could win the 8th title?" And he answered flatly, no. So, the former McLaren and Red Bull driver, David Coulthard, said that he doesn't believe it seems possible for Lewis Hamilton to win the 8th title at least. But we also need to talk about the power unit issue. In fact, arriving in Montreal, there is a lot of talk about the electric energy supplied to the hybrid engine. Be aware that each year a maximum of 4 power units can be used, otherwise penalties are incurred. And Frederick Wiesteen, who has been working at Ferrari since 2012 and is responsible for the turbo part of the engines, has commented on Ferrari's power units and said that in Canada, 73% of the lap is done with throttled gas. So a large part of the engine is used, especially the turbo part and also the hybrid part of the engine. So be careful, with cooler temperatures you can make the most of the engine throughout the lap and also in the race. But if it gets hotter, well, then there you have to manage the use of the hybrid engine more, especially in braking and acceleration, to avoid having the famous phenomenon of clipping in the straights. This is a factor we have observed. Ferrari weighed a lot in Ferrari in recent years. We have seen many times Ferrari not having the top speed of the opponents. Not so much for the aerodynamic resistance of the car, but more for the famous clipping phenomenon and therefore the problem of the Ferrari's electric motor, therefore the hybrid part. For this reason, with the freezing of the power units that started from 2022, it is essential to also replace the internal components. Individual, the motor generator unit, heat the motor generator unit, kinetic, the turbocharger of the power unit, to always have a fresh component inside the engine and avoid one of the components maybe causing problems in the race, and therefore forces the driver to stop. However, this must be avoided at all costs in a world championship where the power units are frozen and there are a maximum of 4 power units that can be used. For this reason, it is necessary to replace the internal components to have a fresh engine that does not cause problems in the race. But we also need to talk about the criticism made by the drivers to the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, particularly about the way of dueling, of clashing on the track, which is becoming increasingly artificial. You can overtake with drag reduction system, you can make calibrated overtakes, but without making natural overtakes. And this is what Verstappen said, who said, "I adapt to the current way of racing, to the rules in force." But it's not a normal way of dueling, let's say natural, it's an artificial way of racing, and this is a problem for all drivers. Alex Albon said the same thing. At 250 km/h, it's hard to precisely time an overtake as it requires millimeter accuracy. That's why we also saw the recent clashes in Spain where after Verstappen had to give back the position, and Cristiano Horn said we had to ask Max to give back the position because we weren't sure that overtake was allowed. We could have received a penalty, and to avoid all that, we decided to give back the position. But this Formula 1 so constructed where the pit must ask to give back the position, where you can no longer make limit overtakes. But everything must be calculated also because of the dirty air that affects the tires. This is the Formula 1 we want. This is the question I also ask you. For me, no. There should be a more free Formula 1, certainly, with less aerodynamics, less dirty air, but it's a Formula 1 that's too constructed, too artificial even in the overtakes. And the same Jonathan Whitley, who is a former technical director of Red Bull and current main team in Sauber, has intervened on the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile. He said that the stewards have a lot of pressure on the way the drivers race and in the early laps, on the situations that happen on the track. Why then do the team principals complain to the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile? Even we fans ourselves complain to the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile about the decisions they make. And so the stewards no longer know what decision to make because it could always be the wrong one. So in my opinion, we need a more natural way of racing, fewer rules, let the drivers be free to race on the track. Certainly with different cars as well, because these cars here are too bulky, too big, and do not allow for various overtakes in different ways. But we also have to talk about the latest news. That is, Leclerc's Ferrari was checked for asymmetric braking, so in the rear brakes part, after the checks in Spain. And the issue of asymmetric braking emerged after Red Bull's performance drop in 2024, which particularly accused McLaren of using this system to gain an advantage on the track. That's why checks were also carried out on Leclerc's single-seater in Barcelona. On the Ferrari, which however had no problems with the rear brakes, there were no irregularities, and therefore it passed the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile checks. I appreciated Russell's comment about social media, where he stated that what we observe on these platforms does not reflect reality. He wants to keep his private life to himself. But it's normal that fans also want to see the lives of the drivers. And there are also sponsors interested in the whole phenomenon, let's say, of social media. So all the advertising that is also done by the drivers themselves, who become ambassadors of various sponsors and various brands. That's why you need to find a balance between private life and social life. But what you see online is not the same as what happens in private life. And sometimes it's appropriate that the drivers also remind the press of this. And he also added something very interesting that made me think that a driver like Kimi Räikkönen, who has always been appreciated for his straightforward way of intervening, can also be Iceman. So a very cold driver, well, today he might not be appreciated in the same way as in the past. But there is also the phenomenon of Piastri, who is a driver similar to Kimi in some respects in his statements too. He is still appreciated in his own way. However, according to Russell, Kimi Räikkönen, at 18 years old, if he debuted today, years without social media and so taciturn, he would not have the same clamor, he would not have the same relevance that he had in the past. It makes us understand, it makes us reflect on how the phenomenon of social media has also impacted the lives of the drivers. One last thing after the intervention that Lance Stroll underwent. Now he is fit, he is ready to race in Canada in his home race, and so he will race in Aston Martin. For this reason, Drogovic remains on standby, and so the Canadian driver will be present for the Canadian Grand Prix. That being said, guys, these are the most important news of the day. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated with new content. News about Formula 1 and Ferrari. Please tell me your opinion in the comments on all the topics that have been discussed, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on the subject of Leclerc. That's all from Rastro, see you in the next video.